The priest said God forgives everything, but what entered me that day wasn't sacred. It was something darker, something that would tear my family apart and leave me questioning everything I ever believed about faith, love, and redemption. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I became the woman everyone in my small town of Riverside, Ohio whispers about when they think I can't hear them. I grew up in a religious household. My father was a deacon, my mother taught Sunday school for 23 years, and I never missed a single service until I went to college. I met my husband Daniel at a church youth retreat when we were both 19. He was everything my parents wanted for me: devoted, kind, studying to become a youth pastor. We married at 23, and by 25, I had given birth to our daughter Emma. Life seemed perfectly scripted, like one of those faith-based movies where everything works out in the end because the characters pray hard enough. But real life isn't a movie. Real life has cracks that widen slowly until everything you've built comes crashing down. And sometimes, those cracks don't appear where you'd expect them. Sometimes they appear in the holiest of places. It started 3 years ago when Father Michael arrived at St. Augustine's. He was young for a priest, maybe 37, with kind eyes and a voice that made every sermon feel personal, like he was speaking directly to you and only you. I noticed him, of course I did. I'm married, not blind. But noticing someone and acting on it are two completely different things. At least that's what I kept telling myself. If you're relating to this story, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps me share these real experiences, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. Daniel had been distant for months. Youth ministry was consuming him, leaving him exhausted and emotionally unavailable. We'd gone from making love 3 times a week to barely touching each other goodnight. I tried talking to him, suggesting counseling, even surprising him with romantic dinners. But he'd just pat my hand and say he was tired, that God's work was demanding. I felt invisible in my own marriage. Like a piece of furniture he'd grown so accustomed to that he no longer truly saw me. That's when I started volunteering more at the church. Not to get closer to Father Michael, I swear that wasn't my intention. I just needed somewhere to feel valued, somewhere my efforts were noticed and appreciated. I organized fundraisers, coordinated the food pantry, cleaned the sanctuary every Thursday evening. And Father Michael always thanked me. Not the absent-minded thanks Daniel had perfected, but genuine gratitude that made me feel seen again. The first time something felt different was during confession. I'd gone in troubled, needing to talk about the growing resentment I felt toward my husband, the anger that was building inside me like a storm. Father Michael listened in that way of his, and when he spoke, his voice was so gentle, so understanding. He said something I'll never forget. Sometimes God tests our faith by making us feel alone in a crowded room. But Sarah, you're not alone. I see you. Those 4 words, I see you, hit me harder than anything Daniel had said to me in years. I left that confessional feeling lighter, but also more confused than I'd ever been. Was it wrong that a priest's words affected me more than my husband's? Was it sinful that I found myself looking forward to Thursday evenings, knowing Father Michael would be there? The line between appropriate and inappropriate is thinner than people think. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets and warning signs. It erodes slowly, conversation by conversation, glance by glance. We started talking after my cleaning sessions. Just small talk at first. How Emma was doing in school, whether Daniel's youth group was growing, what books we were reading. But those conversations grew longer, more personal. He told me about his doubts, the loneliness of his calling, how sometimes he wondered what his life would have been if he'd chosen a different path. And I told him things I'd never told anyone. About how I felt trapped in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but felt hollow on the inside. About how I sometimes resented Emma because she tied me to Daniel forever. About how I lay awake at night, wondering if this was all there was to life. If I'd peaked at 25, and everything from here was just a slow decline into comfortable unhappiness. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to follow what happens next, because this story takes turns I never saw coming. The first time we touched was innocent. I was reaching for a box of hymnals on a high shelf, and he steadied me with a hand on my waist. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but I felt that touch for days afterward. The second time was less innocent. We were sitting in the empty sanctuary late one Thursday, talking about loneliness, and my hand somehow ended up in his. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, just holding hands in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows, and I felt more intimate connection in those 10 minutes than I'd felt with Daniel in months. "This is wrong," I finally whispered, but I didn't let go of his hand. "I know," he said, and he didn't let go either. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't even make plans to see each other outside the church. But something had shifted, some boundary had been crossed, and we both knew there was no going back to simple friendship. The next week, I told myself I wouldn't go to the church on Thursday. I'd send Daniel instead, or skip it altogether. But Thursday came, and my car drove itself to St. Augustine's like it had a mind of its own. He was waiting in the sanctuary, and the look on his face told me he'd been as conflicted as I was. "I prayed for strength to send you away," he said. "But when I heard your car in the parking lot, all I felt was relief." That night we kissed. It was tender and desperate and wrong and perfect all at once. We didn't go further, though God knows we both wanted to. He pulled away first, breathing hard. His forehead pressed against mine. "I've taken vows," he said. "Sacred vows." "I've taken vows too," I reminded him. "And I have a daughter who needs me to be better than this." But knowing something is wrong doesn't always give you the strength to stop it. We kept meeting. Not every Thursday, but often enough that I started lying to Daniel about where I'd been. We'd sit in his office behind locked doors and talk for hours, stealing kisses that grew less innocent with each passing week. He told me he loved me one night in mid-September, with rain hammering against the church windows and the world feeling very far away. And I told him I loved him too, even though I knew those words were a kind of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical act could. My marriage to Daniel was barely functioning at this point. We were roommates who happened to share a child. He'd come home exhausted, eat whatever I'd prepared in silence, help Emma with homework, and fall asleep watching television. We hadn't made love in 4 months. I'd stopped trying to initiate anything because the rejection hurt too much. And the terrible truth was, I didn't even want him anymore. Every time he touched me casually, my skin crawled because it wasn't the touch I craved. Please subscribe if you're invested in this story. It gets more complicated from here, and you'll want to hear how I navigated the impossible choices ahead. Emma sensed something was wrong. Children always do, no matter how well you think you're hiding it. She started having nightmares, clinging to me more than usual, asking why Daddy and I didn't laugh together anymore. Each question was a knife in my heart because I knew I was destroying her stable world for something that could never have a future. What kind of life could Father Michael and I possibly have together? He'd have to leave the priesthood. I'd have to divorce Daniel, and Emma would grow up in a broken home. The math didn't work. It never would. But love, or whatever twisted version of it we'd created, doesn't care about math. It doesn't care about logic or consequences or the collateral damage it leaves in its wake. I knew I should end it. I knew that every day I continued was another day of lies, another betrayal stacked on top of previous betrayals. But I couldn't make myself stop. Those hours with Michael were the only time I felt truly alive, truly myself, not just Daniel's wife or Emma's mother, or the perfect church volunteer everyone expected me to be. Then everything changed on a cold November evening. I told Daniel I was meeting my friend Rachel for coffee, but instead I was in Michael's office, sitting close to him on the small sofa he kept for counseling sessions. We were talking about running away together, spinning fantasies we both knew were impossible. He'd just kissed me when we heard the door to the church open. We froze. Michael quickly moved away from me, straightening his collar while I smoothed my hair with shaking hands. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, getting closer. The office door wasn't locked because we'd been so lost in each other that we'd forgotten basic caution. The doorknob turned, and my heart stopped completely because I just knew, that our secret was about to become public knowledge in the worst possible way. Father Benedict, the senior priest, stood in the doorway. He was 74 years old, had been at St. Augustine's for 30 years, and his face in that moment was a mixture of shock, disappointment, and something that looked almost like pity. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears. "Father Michael," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to speak with you, alone." I grabbed my purse and fled. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember what excuse I gave Daniel when I walked through the door 20 minutes earlier than expected, my face probably pale and my hands definitely shaking. All I remember is lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Daniel snored beside me, knowing that my entire life was about to implode. Michael didn't call or text. 3 days passed in agonizing silence. I went through the motions of normal life, making Emma's lunches, doing laundry, pretending everything was fine while internally I was screaming. Daniel noticed I was distracted, but he attributed it to stress from the upcoming church fundraiser. If only he knew. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next changed everything in ways I never could have predicted. On the 4th day, I received a call from Father Benedict asking me to come to the church. My stomach dropped. This was it. The confrontation I'd been dreading. I considered refusing, running away, but where would I go? My entire life was in Riverside. I told Daniel I needed to finalize some fundraiser details and drove to St. Augustine's with my heart in my throat. Father Benedict received me in the main office, not Michael's small room. Michael wasn't there, and when I asked where he was, Father Benedict's expression told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. Father Michael has been transferred to a parish in Montana, effective immediately. He left yesterday. The room spun. Montana. He'd left without saying goodbye, without fighting for us, without even a text message. I felt betrayed and relieved in equal measure, which made me feel even worse. Did he? I couldn't finish the question. He confessed everything, Father Benedict said gently. And Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to shame you or judge you. I've been a priest for 47 years, and I've seen how complicated the human heart can be. But this needs to end now. For everyone's sake. Most importantly, for your daughter's sake. He told me that Michael's transfer was presented as a routine reassignment. No one knew the real reason except the 3 of us and the bishop. My secret was safe, but only if I ended things completely. No contact, no following him to Montana, no continuing this in any form. Michael had agreed to these terms. He'd chosen his vocation over me. I should have felt devastated. Instead, I felt numb. It was over. The decision had been made for me. I could go back to my marriage, recommit to Daniel, and pretend none of this ever happened. Except it had happened, and I was fundamentally changed by it. The woman who'd kissed a priest in a church office couldn't simply disappear and be replaced by the obedient wife and mother everyone expected. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I threw myself into being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect church volunteer. I suggested marriage counseling to Daniel, and to my surprise, he agreed. In our 3rd session, the therapist asked us when we'd last been truly intimate, and Daniel admitted he'd been struggling with low libido due to stress and had been too embarrassed to address it. He thought if he just worked harder, was more devoted to his ministry, the problem would resolve itself. We were both guilty of hiding, I realized. He'd been hiding behind his work, afraid to confront his own inadequacies. I'd been hiding behind resentment, using his emotional unavailability as an excuse for my own choices. Neither of us had been brave enough to be vulnerable until it was almost too late. If you're finding this story relatable or compelling, please subscribe. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps others feel less alone in their struggles. Daniel and I started rebuilding slowly. It wasn't perfect. Some days I still thought about Michael, wondered if he ever thought about me, questioned whether I'd made the right choice in not fighting for what we had. But then Emma would climb into my lap, or Daniel would reach for my hand while we watched television, and I'd remember that some loves are worth fighting for, even when they're not the passionate, all-consuming kind that burns bright and fast. I stopped volunteering at the church. Too many memories, too much temptation to ask about Michael even though I knew I shouldn't. I found a new outlet in community theater, something I'd loved in high school but had abandoned after marriage. Daniel came to every performance, brought flowers, told me how proud he was. We started having date nights again, talking about things beyond Emma's schedule and church responsibilities. We started making love again, and while it wasn't the desperate passion I'd experienced in stolen moments with Michael, it was honest and real and ours. But here's where the story takes another turn. Because 6 months after Michael left, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized his handwriting immediately. My hands shook as I opened it, knowing I should throw it away unread but unable to resist. Inside was a single page, and the words on it made my blood run cold. He was leaving the priesthood. The guilt had been eating him alive, he wrote. He couldn't continue serving God when he'd broken his vows so completely. He'd fallen in love with me, truly and deeply, and that love had shown him that his calling was never as strong as he'd convinced himself it was. He was moving back to his hometown of Austin, Texas, starting over. And then, in the last paragraph, the words that haunted me. I'm not asking you to leave your family. I know what we did was wrong, but I need you to know that what I felt for you was real. You showed me what I'd been missing my entire life. If you ever find yourself free, if you ever want a different life, I'll be here. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door. I should have burned that letter. I should have told Daniel about it immediately, used it as a cautionary tale in our counseling sessions. Instead, I hid it in a box at the back of my closet, underneath old sweaters I never wore. And sometimes, late at night, when Daniel was asleep and Emma was safe in her bed, I'd take it out and read it again, tracing his handwriting with my fingertips and wondering about the life I didn't choose. Daniel and I continued improving. We were good together, maybe better than we'd ever been. He cut back his hours at the youth ministry, making our marriage a priority. We took a vacation to Florida, just the three of us, and it was wonderful. Emma was thriving, her nightmares gone, her smile bright and genuine. This was enough, I told myself. This was more than enough. This was everything I'd prayed for before Michael entered my life. But that letter remained hidden in my closet, and I never threw it away. Make sure you subscribe to this channel to see if there's an update to this story, because this isn't over yet. Then 2 months ago, Daniel came home early from a youth group event. He'd been looking for his old college sweater, he said, and thought it might be in my closet since we'd recently reorganized. My heart stopped. I'd been at the grocery store with Emma when he'd been searching through boxes, looking for a piece of clothing that didn't exist because I'd donated it years ago. The letter was on our bed when I got home. He'd read it. Of course he'd read it. And the look on his face when I walked through the door with Emma skipping beside me, carrying bags of groceries and chattering about the cookies she'd convinced me to buy, was one I'll never forget. It was betrayal, yes, but also resignation. Like he'd always known something like this was waiting in the shadows of our marriage. Emma, go play in your room, he said quietly. She looked between us, sensing the tension, then scampered off. The grocery bag slipped from my hands. Daniel? How long? He asked. How long has this letter been in our closet? I could have lied. I could have said I'd just received it, that I was planning to tell him, that it didn't mean anything. But I was tired of lying. So tired. 6 months? I said. I've had it for 6 months. The silence that followed was deafening. He picked up the letter, read it again like he was hoping the words would somehow be different this time. Were you going to tell me? He finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. I kept telling myself I would, but then another day would pass and another, and it became easier to just pretend it didn't exist. Like you pretended your affair with Father Michael didn't exist? So he knew. Father Benedict must have told him, or maybe he'd figured it out on his own. Either way, the secret I'd been protecting was out. It wasn't an affair, I said weakly. We never... Does it matter? He interrupted. You loved him. You love him still. Or you wouldn't have kept that letter. He was right, of course. I did still love Michael. Or at least I loved the version of myself I'd been with him. The woman who'd felt seen and desired and important. But I also loved Daniel. Loved the life we'd built. Loved the man he was becoming as we worked through our problems. It was possible to love two people at once, I'd learned, but that didn't make it hurt any less. "What do you want me to say?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "I want you to tell me the truth," he said. "If he called right now and asked you to come to Austin, would you go?" And there it was. The question I'd been asking myself for 6 months every time I read that letter late at night. Would I go? Would I leave my daughter, my husband, my entire life for the possibility of something different? Would I choose passion over stability? The unknown over the familiar? Please subscribe if you want to know what happens next. This story is still unfolding, and I need your support as I navigate these impossible choices. "I don't know," I whispered, and that honesty felt like the most brutal betrayal of all. Daniel left that night. Not permanently, he said, but he needed space to think. He took a bag of clothes and went to his brother's house across town. Emma cried when he kissed her goodbye, not understanding why Daddy was leaving. I held her as she sobbed, hating myself for being the reason her world was crumbling. He's been gone for 3 weeks now. We talk every day about Emma, about logistics, about therapy, but we don't talk about the letter or what happens next. I know he's waiting for me to make a choice, stay and fight for our marriage, prove that Daniel and Emma are enough, or admit that part of me will always wonder what could have been with Michael, that the life I'm living feels like settling. I haven't contacted Michael. I haven't thrown away his letter either. It sits in my nightstand now, not hidden, but not displayed either. A reminder of the crossroads I'm standing at, of the decision that will define the rest of my life. Emma asks every day when Daddy's coming home. I tell her soon, but I don't actually know if that's true. Daniel and I are in limbo, both waiting for the other to make a move. Our therapist says I need to make a definitive choice, that this uncertainty is toxic for everyone involved. She's right. I know she's right. But how do you choose? How do you decide between the safe, familiar love that's been tested and rebuilt, and the passionate, untested possibility of something that might burn out as quickly as it ignited? How do you weigh your daughter's stability against your own happiness? How do you know if you're being selfish or finally being honest with yourself? Last week, I drove by St. Augustine's. Father Benedict was outside tending the church garden. He saw me and waved, and I waved back. Part of me wanted to go in, to ask his advice, to confess that I was still struggling with the same temptation that had led me astray in the first place. But I kept driving because I already know what he'd say. Choose your family. Choose the vows you made before God. Choose the righteous path. But righteousness doesn't keep you warm at night when you're lying alone, wondering if this is all there is. Faith doesn't fill the void when you're questioning every choice you've ever made. And God, well, God has been silent on the subject of my heart's deepest desires. I look at Emma, and I know what the right choice should be. I look at Daniel's picture on my phone, and I know what everyone expects me to do. But then I read Michael's letter one more time, and I hear his voice saying, "I see you." And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, choosing myself for once wouldn't be the selfish act everyone would think it is. So here I am, standing at this crossroads, and I honestly don't know which path to take. Do I stay and continue rebuilding a marriage that might never be what I truly want? Do I go and chase a possibility that might turn out to be a fantasy? Do I risk my daughter's happiness for my own? Or do I sacrifice my potential happiness for hers? The priest said God forgives everything. But what entered me that day wasn't sacred. It was desire, confusion, loneliness, and a hunger for something more than the life I'd been living. And I still don't know if that makes me human or if it makes me lost. What would you do in my place? If you were standing where I am, with a husband willing to forgive but maybe never forget? A daughter who needs stability, and a letter from someone who represents everything you can't have but desperately want. What would you choose? Would you stay for your family? Would you go for yourself? Would you try to find some middle ground that probably doesn't exist? I need to know I'm not alone in this struggle. I need to know that other people have faced impossible choices and survived them. So please, tell me in the comments below. What would you do? And if you've been following this story, make sure you're subscribed because whatever I decide, I'll share it here. This community is the only place where I feel I can be completely honest about how broken and confused and desperate I am for answers that might not exist. The choice is coming. I can feel it. Daniel called today and said we need to talk this weekend, that we can't keep going like this. He's right. Emma deserves better than parents in limbo. I deserve better than this constant state of uncertainty. And Michael, wherever he is, deserves to know if I'm coming or if he needs to finally move on. So what would you do in my place? Comment below, subscribe to this channel, and help me figure out if I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Or if I already did 3 years ago when I first let myself see Father Michael as more than just a priest. Your voice might be the one that helps me find my way through this darkness. Thank you for listening, for not judging, for being here. I'll update you all soon. I promise.